Good afternoon. Welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of the Business, Housing, Zoning, and Inspections Committee for today, which is May 2nd. I am joined by a quorum of the committee that includes Council Members Chavez, Rainville, and Chugtai, and we do expect Council Member Ellison shortly. I'm going to first start with the consent agenda, as always. This is item number 8, which are the liquor license approvals, and item 9, which are the liquor license renewals. I will note that there are 71 renewals coming forward today. Item number 10 are the gambling license approvals. 11 is a legislative directive with regard to studying the minimum compensation rate for TNC companies. Item 12 is setting a public hearing for May 16th for the project at 415 Royalston Avenue North. Item 13 is setting a public hearing also for the 16th on the moratorium on high-impact industrial uses. Item number 14 is an alley vacation at 2840 Chicago Avenue. 15 is a rezoning at 465 Girard Terrace. Item 16 is a rezoning at 137 46th Street West. Item number 17 is a rezoning at 2426 Inglewood. Are there any items on the consent agenda anyone would like to pull for discussion or question amongst the committee? Seeing none, I'll move to approve the consent agenda. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Those items are approved. We'll now move to the public hearing portion of our agenda, which is items 1 through 7, starting with item number 1. Mr. Cervantes is here to present that item. Thank you for your time today, sir.
Thank you, Chair Goodman and committee members. I'm Licensed Inspector Max Cervantes, Licenses and Consumer Services. I'm presenting an application today from Paralima, owned by 528 Washington Avenue North, LLC. The business address is 514 Washington Avenue North, Suite 103, located in Ward 3. The applicant is requesting an on-sale liquor, no live entertainment, and Sunday sales license. Their hours of operation will be 10:30 a.m. to 9 o'clock p.m. daily, and will have 47 seats indoors. On April 11th, public hearing notices were sent to property owners within 450 feet of the premises. Notices were also sent to the North Loop Neighborhood Association, the Warehouse District Business Association, and Councilmember Rainville. We have received no comments from the community. This is a new business on the first floor of the Duffy Lofts building, and if approved, will provide fast casual Mexican-inspired food and drink. The Licenses and Consumer Services Division recommends approval of an on-sale liquor, no entertainment, Sunday sales license for Paralima.
Are there any questions for Mr. Cervantes on item number 1? Seeing none, I'll open the public hearing on item number 1, which is an on-sale liquor license, no live entertainment for Paralima at 548 Washington Avenue. Is there anyone here to speak to this issue? You must be Ms. Smith.
I am. Thank
Welcome.
you, Chair Goodman. So I'd love to tell you a little bit about this concept. It is a sister brand of Crisp and Green and Stock and Spade, going to be adjacent to Stock and Spade right there in the Duffy Lofts in the North Loop. The plan is to also follow a fast casual model, so very much a sit down or takeaway option. Of course, alcohol will only be a sit-down option, and we will not have a patio or anything, so it will stay within the 4 walls. It is going to be pre-mixed margaritas, so there won't be the ability to pour from bottles and make mixed drinks, and there won't be any other alcohol on the premise besides the tequila that will be pre-mixed by management. So that is kind of how we plan to utilize the liquor license, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much for being here today, Ms. Smith.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else here to speak to this issue? Anyone? Anyone? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and ask the clerk to report that Councilmember Ellison is present. Councilmember Rainville.
Thank you, Ms. Smith, for coming down today, and thank you for investing in the city of Minneapolis. I wish you the best of luck, and I'd like to make a motion to approve item number 1, please.
Item number 1 has been moved for approval. Further comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That item is approved. Thank you for coming down. We'll move on to item number 2, which is the Nicollet Event Center at 2616 Nicollet Avenue. Mr. Olson is here. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Goodman and committee members. My name is Joseph Olson, Inspector with Business Licenses and Consumer Services. I'm presenting an application today for Nicollet Event Center, owned by the Nicollet Event Center LLC. This business is located at 2616 Nicollet Avenue in Ward 10. The applicant is requesting a rental hall license and an extended hour license. The hours of operation will be Monday through Thursday from 6 a.m. To 1 a.m. and Friday and Saturday from 6 a.m. until 3 a.m. Notices were sent to property owners within 300 feet of the premises, as well as the Whittier Neighborhood Organization, the Whittier Alliance Business Association, and council member Chugtai. We have received 2 concerns from the business community, citing limited parking on site at the rental hall property. The applicant has met with one of these businesses to discuss this issue. Because this business is not open, there have been no police calls or 311 calls associated with this business. And therefore, the License and Consumers Division recommends approval of the rental hall license and an extended hours license. This concludes my presentation. I will stand for any comments or questions. Thanks.
Thank you for your report. We'll see if there are questions or comments from the committee. And I am using speaker management. I just wanted to let committee members know that. Seeing none, thank you for your report. We'll open the public hearing and start with Mr. Parpus, followed by Ms. Christ. Ms. Christ. Mr. Parpus, welcome.
Thank you. So my name is Gus Parpus. I represent Christos Greek Restaurant at 2632 Nicollet. After receiving the notice for public hearing, I reached out to Inspector Olson to gather information. What I found alarmed me. A rental hall that would accommodate weddings and other social events during prime restaurant hours would be considered for that address, 2 doors up from my parking lot with 0 parking requirements. This, in light of the parking issues that we currently face on Nicollet Avenue, seems unconscionable. Street parking is already scarce, and those of us who own parking lots are constantly fighting to keep unauthorized cars out of our parking lots. I do not relish being forced to be the bad guy by towing cars. On the contrary, at Christos, we think of ourselves as the good guys, the good neighbors who feed the people, who maintain a clean property, who beautify the avenue with our outdoor plantings, who donate to area nonprofits, and who have cultivated excellent relationships with our customers over the 35 years that we have been in that spot. Okay, we are the people who were fairly instrumental in cleaning up the boulevard from prostitution and drug dealers. My car was shot up by drug dealers when they realized where the pressure was coming from. Okay, but we persisted, and eventually, with the help of local authorities, we prevailed. And we're proud to have been a big part of turning a rundown segment of Nicollet Avenue, one that had atrophied after the Kmart was put on there, into a thriving ethnic food center called Eat Street. I'm here to tell you that the no parking requirements policy is grossly unfair to businesses like ours who have invested in real estate on the avenue and own parking lots. Okay, the bottom line is this: we cannot survive, never mind thrive, without the support of the customers who drive to come to Christos, okay? And they come from all over. Please consider the following. We employ 35 workers, most of them from the neighborhood. We pay $68,000 in property taxes on our property. We collect $140,000 of sales tax for the state, okay?
Mr. Parpus, I'm going to need you to wrap up.
Okay. I've made a tremendous effort, and I reached out to Mr. Isi finally, who connected. Council member Shaktai was kind enough to join us. We walked the space. We looked at the parking situations, and we have any number of concerns. And I'll list them for you here before I sit.
Mr. Parpus, that means wrap up.
Okay. I'm concerned about the
I'm going to have the clerk pull out the timer. You had 2 minutes, I've given you 4, I'm asking you to wrap it up now.
All right. Well, I'll be happy to wrap it up. I just want to go on record as having concerns about the parking and about the number of guests that they're going to have over there.
We hear you, thank you. Ms. Christ? Do we have the timer? Because I can't do it myself. Okay. Okay, great. Ms. Christ, welcome.
Thank
You
you.
have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. My name is Gina Christ. I'm from the Black Forest Inn on 26th and Nicollet. Our parking lot is directly across the street from the event center where this application was submitted. Gus walked, I'm a little confused because Gus walked the space yesterday with the inspector, and they found that the building had 5 parking spots behind it, directly behind the event center. The application says 30 spots, so I'm here to clarify that the Black Forest Inn does not have an agreement with the applicant. I do not know where the 25 other spots are, but I do know they are not our parking lot directly across the street from theirs. So I'm concerned about an application that lists parking spots that they do not have, and there seems to be some question about that right now. We're also deeply concerned about creating adversarial relationships, as Gus stated, with our neighbors on each street. As it stands right now, we do not tow out of the Black Forest Inn parking lot, and we would support any business and do support the businesses across the street that have guests that arrive and leave in short periods of time. The hairstyling place, Lou's Sandwich, these are very quick and carry, and we would never want to tow their customers from our lot, and we would hate to be in an environment where we were forced to have an adversarial relationship with everybody, you know, where once we start towing, we cannot pick and choose who we tow. And that cannot be overstated, the degree to which I'm happy to come here and stand and say this over and over and over again for any business on each street, because we do want to thrive, and we want to be in good relationship with our customers and with our neighbors. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here to speak to this specific issue? Is the applicant here? Okay, Mr. Olson, maybe you could explain, come back up, and perhaps you could explain, did you ask the applicant to be here?
I did. I believe there's a conflict. I think he's working his day job today, so I don't know. He was definitely invited. He said.
I just wanted to make sure that, and I guess I could ask the city attorney as well.
Madam Chair, that's correct.
Okay. Councilmember Chugtai, thank you for following speaker management.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Olson, I've got just a couple of questions for you. I want to start by thanking you for working really closely with our office, with the applicant and Mr. Parpus on over the last few days on addressing some of these concerns. You've been very, very wonderful to work with. Thank you for all that you do. Just a couple of quick questions for you. Do you know what or can you share with us what the maximum capacity for the rental hall is?
In terms of like occupant load, fire?
Yes.
I'm not sure what that is. I just know that it's a 4,200 square foot kind of a hall, sort of square shaped open rental hall.
Got it.
So I don't know the specifics about occupant load.
Do you, how would we go about finding that out? Is that a question for fire, reg
Yes.
services? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great.
I can provide that information to you.
Awesome. Excellent. So I know that's a question that's come up a couple of times just today, and I want to make sure that we're really, really clear about what the maximum occupancy limit is. And then, do you know? I know the building that we're talking about on 26th and Nicollet has a parking lot behind it, and I'm wondering, do we know at all how many what the capacity of that parking lot is in an objective way?
We don't, and the lot is unstriped at this time.
Correct.
So, again, I don't know what that is. It doesn't appear to be in use at this time because the property is vacant.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, I also, had a chance to talk with the applicant just yesterday, and I know it was his intention to be here. And I just got a response from him when I didn't see him in the chambers that got held up with work and isn't able to make it right now. So thank you. That's all I have for you. Gus and Gina, thank you very much for coming in and sharing your comments. I had a chance to read some of the written comments that were submitted as well. As you know, we are legally required to grant permits that meet the requirements that we have, and this is a permit that meets all of those requirements. But I am sensitive to concerns that you brought up and shared with the Whittier Alliance and our office. I certainly want all businesses on Nicollet to be successful, especially as we look to the next couple of years with us, reopening Nicollet at the Kmart site. And I had a chance to meet with you and Mr. Mahmoud Issa, who's the applicant, just yesterday morning, and I believe you brought up the same concerns we talked about in this public format right now with the parking requirements and concerns about the number of guests that are coming in and how that's going to impact parking and potentially having guests for the rental hall using your privately owned parking lot or the privately owned parking lot at Black Forest. And, that's something I can appreciate. I've had a chance to walk through with you, and then on Friday before that, the rental hall. It looks like a construction site right now, but see the amount of space that's in there, look at the parking lot behind. I am excited about the agreement that we were able to get to with the applicant yesterday, with Mr. Issa yesterday, which included 6 different things, I think, that go towards addressing the parking concerns with both Christos and Black Forest, including making sure that the parking lot is fixed and restriped as quickly as possible, postage of signs at the front door of the event center that point visitors to the parking lot in the back, and adds something about making sure that that people know that if they're parking in a private lot, that they're at risk of being towed, and that they should only use the private parking lot for the event center behind the building or use public on-street parking. And making sure that that sign at the front of the building is posted both in English and in Somali. Posting a sign behind the building at the parking lot that reads, Nicollet Event Center parking only, and that parking in other privately owned parking lots could result in towing, and that if the lot is full, visitors should use public on-street parking. That sign should also be posted both in English and in Somali, a sign in the building reminding visitors that their car should only be parked in the event center's parking lot, and that if their car is parked in a different private lot, that it needs to be moved. Making an announcement at every event that's held, reminding guests that they need to make sure their car is parked in the correct locations, and that every lease that they sign with a vendor has to include specific information and details about where visitors are expected to park, how directions to how they access the parking lot since it is behind the building. I think these 6 commitments are an important part of mitigating the concerns that you've brought up. I also understand that that these are, just agreements that the two of you came up with me yesterday, and I want to actually direct this to our city attorney and see if we can take these agreements and attach them to the rental license.
Madam Chair and committee members, certainly business licensing is well attuned and with the practice of putting conditions on a license, and they could develop an agreement that reflects those conditions, I believe.
Great. And is it possible for us to work with you over the next week so that by the time we get to council next week that we have this formally in writing?
Of course, business licensing would be the appropriate contact for that, and I can certainly assist as needed. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So my goal here is to make sure that we take these agreements, which are all built to protect everyone involved, and make sure that we are all being good neighbors to each other. I really hear both of you when you're saying you don't want to have to be the bad guys. You don't want to have other people's cars towed. That reflects poorly on your business, and you don't want to harm yourself or be a bad neighbor. I also want your new neighbor to be a good neighbor to you and make sure that you are all existing in harmony with one another, especially, again, looking ahead to the reopening of Nicollet at Kmart. So I'm very happy to work with business licensing and our city attorney's office to take these conditions, formalize them, and attach them as conditions to the business license, which means that these are conditions that are then enforced by the city. And so should you have problems with this down the road, there isn't a verbal agreement that you came up with that you're now figuring out how to enforce. There's codified language that we're looking to. With that, I think that's the plan I want to move forward with, and I would like to move this item for approval.
So Councilmember Chugtai has moved forward the application, noting that between now and the council meeting, we will have a list of conditions on the license as it pertains to some of these parking issues. And I'd also ask staff to please make sure to send to all council members the occupancy number. That's something we probably should have had, because I read the comments of Mr. Tarpus that were sent in officially, and I'd had the good fortune to talk to Councilmember Chugtai in advance of this meeting, and I'm really happy that she has went out and met with people in person and essentially did staff's work to try to figure out how to address some of these concerns, and I give you kudos for doing that. I think that was really great work on your part, and I believe the rest of us will follow your lead. And thank you for putting some conditions on the license. I appreciate that you're going to work with our legal staff, and I would urge you to get back to the restaurateurs who are here today so that they see that this is in writing and that that the city will be looking to make sure that the applicant abides. The last thing I would say about this is the rule, the ordinance, some people will call it the law, is that parking is not required. That is not something we can change in committee. That's just a fact that we have to work with. So Councilmember Chugtai's attempts to try to rein this in a little bit and make it easier for everyone are above and beyond what would normally happen, and I'm super appreciative of it, and that is leadership, and I really appreciate your involvement in this and very much support your motion. Further comments? You can use speaker management or put your, are you signed in? Councilmember Rainville.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to echo the sentiments from the chair. Councilmember Chugtai, you've really done a lot of work on this. I feel there are protections for the businesses, but it's very wise to put these conditions on the license so they are enforceable should bad things happen. Thank you. And I'll be voting for this.
On the motion to approve both the application as well as the intent to put some conditions that will come before the council, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item is carried, and I will just assume that Councilmember Chagtai will be back in touch with the Christs and the Parpuses, and they will find out what's happening next. Thank you for your work. We will move on to item number 3, another rental hall license. Ms. Deeser, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. I am Lead License Inspector Christina Steester of Licenses and Consumer Services. I'm presenting an application from the Luminaire, owned by the Luminaire LLC. Business address is 770 9th Street Southeast in Ward 3. The applicant is requesting a rental hall license. The hours of operation will be during private events only when booked, Thursday and Sunday between the hours of 4 p.m. and 10 p.m., Friday and Saturday between the hours of 4 p.m. and 11 p.m. The facility can handle up to 275 seated guests. On April 10th, 6 public hearing notices were sent to property owners within 300 feet of the premises. Notification was also sent to Marcy Homes Neighborhood Association, the Southeast Business Association, and Council Member Rainville. We have received no comments from the community. The Luminaire is housed within a renovated building that is approximately 1,200 square feet. It does have its own parking lot. Since their business has not opened, there have been no 311 or police calls for service. There are no operating conditions or any other issues decision makers should know about. The Licenses and Consumer Services Division recommends approval of a rental hall license for the Luminaire. This concludes my presentation. At this time, I will stand for any comments or questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your report. We'll see if there are any questions from members of the committee. Seeing none, thank you so much for being here today. We'll open up the public hearing on item number 3, which is a rental hall license at 770 9th Street Southeast. Is there anyone here to speak to this issue? Anyone? Please step forward and state your name and address for the record.
Good afternoon. It's Catherine Eckert.
Stephen Trojan.
We are owners of Carbon Kitchen and Market, Gastro Truck Food Truck, and also the Luminaire. So we've been working on the project for about a year and a half. It's actually 12,000 square feet. We do have dedicated parking attached to the building, as well as 2 overflow lots that we have 95 that's included in the rental, and then space in an adjacent lot that we can rent in addition to that if we do need it. So, yeah.
Any questions for us?
Yeah, any questions for us? We're just excited to.
No, and you don't have to justify having parking or not
I know,
having
I was just like,
parking.
after that whole thing, it was.
Seemed like a good thing to bring up.
It's okay. We
Well,
just wanna make
because
sure nobody else-
we can't under the ordinance tell you to have it. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about your business.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been catering for about 14 years with our food truck and just doing other catering events as well. So we actually wanted to do this for 6 years. We've been looking all over the Twin Cities, and like I said, the space came up about a year and a half ago. And we just basically fell in love with it. It's unique, it's large, it's got its private like little courtyard. And for us, you know, we love the servicing of weddings and just kind of throwing those higher quality events. We're also a sustainable venue, so we're focusing on zero waste practices. And just, yeah, looking to do weddings and fundraisers and all sorts of other fun birthday parties and events, so.
Great, thank you so much. I love Gastro Truck. I
Oh,
think
thank
a lot
you,
of people
yeah.
would say that. I mean, it's one of the most well-known, and you guys used to be down on Second and Marquette, and it was just great.
I miss those days, but.
Yeah, it's really, well, the
you.
rally of the food trucks
Yeah.
back in those days,
Yeah.
right? Thank you so
you
much
very
for
much.
working with us. Is there anyone else here to speak to this issue? Anyone? Anyone? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Councilmember Rainville.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Welcome to the Third Ward. Thank you for investing, and I wish you the best of luck. And with that, I'll move to approve item number 3, please.
Item 3 has been moved for approval. Further comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? That item is approved. We'll move on to item number 4, Little Tease, 1726th Street East. This is an expansion of premise and a sidewalk cafe license that Ms. Lingo will be presenting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Goodman and committee members. I'm Amy Lingo, Manager for Business Licensing. I'm presenting an application from Little Tease, Little Tijuana, owned by TBD Restaurants, LLC. This business is located at 17 East 26th Street in Ward 10. The applicant is requesting a permanent expansion of premises and a sidewalk cafe. There will be 10 seats on the sidewalk cafe. Proposed hours are Sunday to Thursday, 4 p.m. to 10 p.m., Saturday and Friday and Saturday, 4 p.m. to 11 p.m. On April 10th, 88 notices were sent to property owners within 300 feet of the premises, and notices were also sent to Whittier Alliance Neighborhood Organization and Councilmember Chugtai. We received one response from the community which supports the sidewalk cafe license. There have been no complaints, 311 calls, or police calls associated with the business, and there are no operating conditions or concerns. The Licensing and Consumer Services Division recommends approval of the permanent expansion and sidewalk cafe. This concludes my presentation, and I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Lingo. Are there any questions for staff? Seeing none, I appreciate your report, and we are going to open the public hearing on item number 4, Little Tease. Is there anyone here to speak to this issue? Welcome, sir. Hi. Please state your name and address for the record.
I'm Travis Service. I'm one of the owners of Little Tease.
You don't have to bend over. It's all good. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
Yeah, we're just trying to expand a little bit, have more offerings, add 10 to 12 seats just to help us out through the summer, provide something good for our guests. We just want to be good neighbors, kind of created that place for the community and for our employees. And we plan to be around for a long time, doing good things.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for taking time to be down here today.
Thanks.
Is there anyone else here who would like to speak to this issue? Anyone? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. Councilmember Chugtai.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you both for coming in today. I had the pleasure of coming to Little Tease and spending a little bit of time with the owners, seeing what they're doing with the space. Little Tijuana used to be one of the most beloved places on 26th, and I'm really, really excited about the ways in which the two of you have kept the things that our community really loved about the establishment. In the few months that you've been open, I think now it's been a few months, this has become, a neighborhood establishment again. People really love being there. So I'm excited for you to have some more space this summer and be able to make sure that folks in the neighborhood that are coming to Little Tease can enjoy the space. With that, I would like to move approval of this item.
Approval of item number 4 has been moved. Further comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That item is approved. We'll move on to item number 5. Lisa, welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Lisa Schmeller. I'm a licensed inspector with the Licenses and Consumer Services. I'm presenting an application for extended hours from Charbel Petroleum Company, doing business as Arco Riverside Stop, located at 2517 Riverside Avenue in Ward 12. The business currently has several licenses: gasoline filling station, grocery, tobacco, 3-2 beer off sale, and extended hours. The business currently has extended hours to be open until 12 a.m. and gas pumps available 24 hours. If approved, the business doors will continue to close at 12 a.m., but will provide a 24-hour service window for customers. The gas pumps will also continue to be available 24 hours. On April 11th, 16 public hearing notices were sent to the property owners within 300 feet of the premises. Notices were also sent to West Bank Business Association, Cedar Riverside Community Council, and Council Member Wansley. We received 0 responses from the public. A review of 311 calls and police calls found no significant issues concerning the business. At this time, License and Consumer Services recommends approval of extended hours. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your report. I'll see if there are any questions for staff on this item. Seeing none, thank you, and we'll open the public hearing on item number 5, which is an extended hours license for Arco Riverside Stop at 2517 Riverside Avenue. Is there anyone here to speak to this issue? Anyone? Anyone? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing. Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am happy to move approval of this item.
Item number 5 has been moved for approval. Further comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That item is approved. Thank you. We will move on to item number 6, Northrop King residential bond issuance at 1500 Jackson. Jamie Rydell. Thank you. You got one of the best projects in the city.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair Goodman and the rest of the Biz Committee. I'm Jamie Radel. I'm a senior project coordinator with the residential finance team at CPED. Today I will be presenting information on the Northrop King residential project, which is located at 1500 Jackson Street Northeast in the Logan Park neighborhood in Ward 1. This project has been before the committee a number of times, including in 2020 and 2021. The council approved affordable housing trust fund loans in the amount of $1.92 million in total, as well as for seeking support for pass-through grants from the city's grant funding partners. Before you today is a request to authorize the issuance of up to $31 million in housing revenue bonds on behalf of the project. Before describing this request for bonds, I'll provide the committee with a brief overview of the project. The Northrop King residential project is a mixed-use project located in the historic 13-building Northrop King complex. The complex has received federal historic designation, which qualifies it for receipt of state and federal historic tax credits. This project will convert 3 of the complex's buildings into 84 units of affordable housing and 8,120 square feet of art business-focused commercial space. The residential portion of the project will include 100% affordable rental units comprised of 23 one-bedroom units, 35 two-bedroom units, and 26 three-bedroom units. This project is using the income averaging tax credit affordability option allowed under the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program. As such, all units within the project must be at or below 80% of AMI, with the average affordability at or below 60% of AMI. This approach allows for the project to financially support units at a deeper affordability level without additional subsidy than would otherwise be feasible under the more traditional affordability set-asides. The rent and income restriction average for this project is 53%, with 16 units at 30% AMI, 44 units at 50% AMI, 9 units at 60% AMI, and 15 units at 80% AMI. In addition, ArtSpace has committed to filling 4 of the units through the Hennepin County Coordinated Entry System. The commercial space is expected to be leased by an ArtSpace nonprofit. ArtSpace is currently in negotiations with a possible tenant. Finally, through the implementation of this project, the developer is leveraging significant on-site improvements at the Northrop King complex through Metropolitan Council, Hennepin County, and Mississippi Watershed Management Organization grants. These grants are supporting improved stormwater management, landscaping, enhanced public realm improvements, community gathering spaces, and a playground for those who live there. Primary financing of the project includes housing revenue bonds, 4% tax credits, historic tax credits, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, partner agency grants, and a large capital contribution from ArtSpace. ArtSpace is working with Raymond James on its affordable housing and tax credit syndication, Capital One on their construction loan, and Cedar Rapids Bank and Trust on its first mortgage. Total project costs for the mixed-use project are approximately $60.1 million. As described earlier, the developer has applied to the city for up to $31 million in tax-exempt housing revenue bonds. The project will be issued in 1 or more series and will be used to finance construction and/or long-term debt. The bonds will generate approximately $16 million in 4% tax credit equity. This bond request is the last remaining funding the project needs and will position it to close in summer 2023. All other project funding is committed, and staff is recommending approval of up to $31 million in tax-exempt housing revenue bonds. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
I will see if there are any questions from members of the committee. I don't see any, so I'm going to go ahead and open the public hearing on item number 6. I see Mr. Law is here. Why don't you come forward if you have anything to say? This is an open public hearing on item number 6. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak to the issue besides Mr. Law? Please, thank you for being here. You don't have to bend over.
I will be brief. I just thank you humbly for the support the city has provided Art Space in its many efforts, and specifically with the redevelopment of the Northrop King site. We're really excited about it. It is emerging and growing and thriving artist and creative community, and we just thank you very much for the support and for this consideration today.
Thank you for being here, Mr. Law. Anyone else to speak to this issue? Anyone? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and move approval myself. This is a major effort at the Northrop King complex. It's being done by an organization that is nationally renowned, but located here in the city of Minneapolis. This is an organization founded in Minneapolis that has done projects in Minnesota, but has over 50 projects all over the country, primarily housing working artists. Working artists have been the target of gentrification for as long as I can remember. I'm sure one on the committee would be happy to tell you about that problem. And ArtSpace was formulated as an organization to try to address that issue. The Northrop King complex was owned by our old friend Jim Stanton, and while he did a good job keeping artists in the complex, he underutilized much of the complex, many of the buildings, and did not invest in infrastructure. This transition from Stanton to ArtSpace has been a labor of love on ArtSpace's part. Although it was granted to them, it came at a price, and they had to pay for it, and they paid dearly to be able to take on this project and bring it to fruition. The fact that we would be able to provide the final financing to get them under construction is something we as a city should be really proud of. In fact, it's attracted the attention of Congresswoman Omar and others at the federal level who are looking to see how they can be more helpful in supporting the mission of funding artists and preventing gentrification in the city. This is a great project. We should be thrilled that we have the opportunity to participate in it, and I want to thank our staff for all of the hard work. I realize that our bond issuance level, this is probably a half or more of what we would get in a year, so it means that our whole housing finance team really had to figure out where we were going to put these resources, and this project rose to the top. It's something to be very proud of today, and I congratulate our friends at ArtSpace as well as our housing staff who have done a great job to get us from here to there. Further comments? Councilmember Ellison.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I'll keep it brief. Just wanted to thank you for the work that you're doing. A lot of artists, period, but also a lot of young artists of color utilizing that Northrop space in order to build their careers and go and take off. And I, philosophically, I don't always love the tools that the federal government gives us for affordable housing, but income averaging is one of those things that I think is a tool that we're seeing that allows us to get at a deeper level of affordability than we've been able to in the past. It's so really great to see that you guys are using that tool. Hopefully leveraging that. I don't know the breakdown off the top of my head, but it's good to see you guys utilizing that. So support the chair's motion, and just want to thank you again for this investment in the community. So thank you.
Further comments or questions? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That item is approved. Thank you all on the housing team. I know you have one more, so we'll move on to item number 7. And before Arlene comes up, I wanted to ask Amy if she would say a few words in anticipation of this particular situation.
Yes. And Arlene's going to come stand
great.
with me. So thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. The next item on your agenda is a report from Arlene Robinson, and Arlene has shared that she will be retiring after 15 years with the city. So I want to take just a minute just to recognize all of her great work. She joined the city in 2008 as a support specialist 2 in the planning division, joined us on the housing team in 2012, and is currently a senior project coordinator with us, managing affordable rental projects like the one you'll hear next. Arlene is a highly valued member of our team, and we're going to miss her personally and professionally. She has worked on some of the toughest projects that have come before our team with determination, skill, and class. Some of the projects she's worked on include Hook and Ladder, Mino Bimadizuin, Amber Apartments, Whittier Community Housing, Calvary Apartments, and Plymouth Avenue Apartments, which is coming up next. 2 weeks ago, we attended the grand opening of 3301 Nicollet, which is a supportive housing project Arlene completed with Alliance Housing. And these projects that I've mentioned represent 481 units, with 189 affordable at 50% AMI, 120 affordable at 30% AMI, and 55 units reserved for people experiencing homelessness. Arlene has played a key role in the unprecedented levels of production of new affordable units by our team in the past couple of years. And I would like to thank her for all of her service to the city of Minneapolis and her residents, and our residents, and wish her well in her retirement.
Arlene, before you give your report on this project, I just wanted to commend you for your incredible work on Cavalry's project adjacent to George Floyd Square. A project that includes 41 units at 30% of area median income and the rehabilitation of a historic church. You have been asked to lead some of the hardest projects in the city that are also some of the most needed. You have gone from being in the planning department to being a senior project manager. You are an example of how we want to encourage women and people of color to move up in the enterprise, learn new things, and lead our most important and passionate goals, building affordable housing. I am devastated that you're leaving our team, but I know that the work that you have done, and every time you go by one of these buildings that you have worked on, you will know that you did something to make a huge difference in the lives of over 500 people who want to live and work in our city. Your work is noticed and appreciated, and you are entitled to retire. You know, normally we say, what can we do to get you to stay? And I'm sure there's at least one or two more projects that we would love to have you work on after the one that you present next. And thank you. Your work here for our city on behalf of our residents has made a gigantic difference, and you will be missed. And thank you for being here to present this report as well. Thank you for pointing this out, Ms. Geisler.
Oh, boy, after that, okay, let me dry my eyes a little bit. It is bittersweet that I am leaving, but our family has relocated to Maryland. They're out there now, and I am going to follow them. So, and I want to get these 2 projects done. So, otherwise, I would have stayed a little bit longer, okay?
Oh, so maybe we could slow this down a little.
As you know, Arlene Robinson, Senior Project Coordinator with Residential Finance. Today, I bring forth several actions for your consideration, all related to Plymouth Avenue Apartments located at 2309 Plymouth and 1254 Russell Avenue North. The proposed project consists of 2 new construction affordable housing buildings at 5 stories and at 4 stories. The 5-story building, referred to as the East Building, will have 38 units, and the 4-story building, referred to as the West Building, will have 25 units. The project will include 14 units with housing support subsidies, 7 units for persons with disabilities, and 7 units for persons experiencing homelessness. The supportive housing will be provided by Simpson Housing, and 7 units will have project-based Section 8 vouchers from the Minneapolis Public Housing Authority, and the remaining 42 units will have rents at 30 to 50% area median income. The project will include 14 studios, 45 one-bedrooms, and 4 two-bedroom units. The total development cost is approximately $20 million. The first 3 actions are related to the proposed tax increment financing. The developer requested that the city establish a housing tax increment financing TIF district to support the project's construction with an expected duration of 26 years. Pending city council approval, the city will issue a pay-as-you-go increment note, TIF note, in the amount of $742,500. The attached Plymouth Avenue Apartments tax increment financing plan provides a detail of the breakdown of how the increment will be distributed and used. The Plymouth Avenue Apartments tax increment financing plan was transmitted for the required 45-day review to Hennepin County, Minneapolis Public Schools, the City Planning Commission, and other interested parties on May 26, 2023. Public comments received by staff are attached to this report. To date, we have received several comments, both supporting and opposing the project. The proposed TIF redevelopment contract requires that the developer construct 63 units of affordable rental housing within 24 months of closing. Additional contract terms are outlined in your report. The developer has agreed to the city's recaptured provisions. The proceeds from the TIF note will be used to support the project's construction. The TIF note was underwritten based on the project's interest rate for the primary lender at the time of underwriting. The fourth action is a passage of a resolution authorizing preliminary and final approval for the issuance of tax-exempt multifamily entitlement housing revenue bonds in amount not to exceed $11 million. The housing revenue bonds provide access to 4% housing tax credits allocated by the city of Minneapolis and will generate approximately $7 million in equity as a source of funds to the project. The bonds will be issued in one series. The table in the report will show you the allocation of the bonds. The last action in the report is regarding the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. The project was awarded a total of $1,890,000 in funding during the 2020 and 2021 Affordable Housing Fund funding rounds. Staff is recommending an additional award not to exceed $945,000 from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund contingency pool, which is the maximum amount allowable under the contingency pool guidelines. Like many other city finance projects, Plymouth Avenue Apartments has been challenged with cost for increases due to interest rates and also increased labor and material costs. When approved, this contingency award will be added to the original amount for a total award of about $2.8 million. With these contingency pool funds and this current TIF and bond request, the project will be fully funded. They will be in a position to close and start construction in June. James Archer with Matrix Development is in attendance today if you have any questions of him. And with that, I will take any questions you have.
Are there any questions for staff on this item? I don't believe so. So that might be close to your last report.
Yes, it is my last report.
Stay close, just in case there's any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will go ahead and open the public hearing on the Plymouth Avenue Apartments Tax Increment Financing Plan and Housing Revenue Bond issuance. Is there anyone here to speak to this issue? I do have one person signed up, Krista Lucas, and you are welcome to come forward and speak now for 2 minutes. And we'll give you a chance to get up there. The timer, okay. I'm trying to keep track of it myself. You can move the microphone down. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Krista Lucas, and I work for the Northside Residents Redevelopment Council, the neighborhood organization for Near North and Willard Hay neighborhoods. And I'm here to read a statement from the Northside Residents Redevelopment Council. We wanted to make sure that committee members have had a chance to review the petition opposing the current proposal to designate 2309 Plymouth a TIF district, which collected 127 signatures. If you haven't had a chance to review the petition, we offer these quotes from residents who signed it and live within 6 blocks of the site. Quote 1. The proposed complex is setting up to fundamentally erode both the standard of living and reduce the quality of life for a significant portion of the existing immediate neighborhood. And this is just one issue in a litany of real-world consequences surrounding building this complex. This neighborhood is already underserved when it comes to enforcement of existing statutes and current laws, and I have an entire list of realities that I haven't seen addressed that need to be. For example, will there be restrictions on pet ownership? The affordable housing properties at both 2419 Plymouth Avenue North and the Homewoods Apartments 1240 North Thomas Avenue and 1239 North Sheridan Avenues all have restrictions in place, and yet animals are housed at those properties. Go walk around those properties. There's dog feces literally surrounding both of these complexes, and no enforcement is made to pick it up. And that's just the dog feces. It doesn't take into account the garbage surrounding these properties. This is partly due to street activity that happens just off of the property with the residents at these properties, but also due to an inadequate plan for commercial garbage removal at these places, and no support nor enforcement, as mentioned, from the city. Resident 2. 1, there are no grocery stores for miles, only food shelves. 2, this area, the funeral home, and North Point will be overrun with people looking for parking, with only 5 parking spaces and 63 units of low-income housing. 3, the fact that the developer is lying about living in Willard Hay and caring about the effects on local residents needs to be addressed at the city and county level. It is an insult to us that live here. 4.
Okay, I'm going to need you to wrap up. And generally speaking, we ask people to talk about the topic at hand, which is the tax increment financing plan and revenue bonds. I would just note you're not really doing that, but could you please wrap up your comments? We did receive the petition.
Thank you. I will move to the end. Given that this proposal is requesting the use of the community's tax dollars in order to be completed, we are requesting that the BIZ committee members deny the request and instead charge city staff and the developer to create an alternative TIF proposal that addresses the community's concerns by reducing the number of housing units and creating a space for a small deli or grocery store. Finally, we would like to take this opportunity to invite everyone committed to building a thriving community in Willard Hay and near North to work with us to create an authentic role for community participation in determining what proposals are funded with our tax dollars. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here to speak to this issue? Again, this is the TIF plan and housing revenue bonds issuance for affordable housing at this site. Is there anyone else here to speak to this issue? Please step forward and state your name and address for the record. And the clerk will need you to sign in also after you're completed. Sorry? The clerk will also need you to sign in after you're done speaking. And you have 2 minutes, sir.
Okay. My name is Nolan Meyer. I live on 2500 Plymouth Avenue North in the 5th Ward. I own my property. My wife-to-be and I moved in October of 2019. I work in mental health. I've taken great pains to avoid getting politically involved in any way so as to do my job and not alienate my patients. This proposal for the affordable housing development on 2309 Plymouth is something I can't avoid anymore because it's a matter of community security. By show of hands, does anybody know how much the salary of a Minneapolis city council member is? It's over $100,000, which is far more than the nationwide median of about $21,000. So I do think that it's fair for us to expect a high standard of our city council. A city council member has a lot of jobs. One of their jobs is to keep us safe. And really, if they can't do that job, none of the other jobs, as far as I'm concerned, hold much relevance. In the time that I have been living in the 5th Ward since 2019, my home has been hit by stray bullets twice, on 2 occasions. Once it hit the outside of my house while my fiance was outside gardening. Another time it went through a window in the room where our future children will be sleeping. Councilman Ellison, I ask you as our leader in the 5th Ward and as one of us in the community to please hear us when we tell you in no uncertain terms, we do not want this. I can see from my living room window 2 affordable housing developments already. There's another one down the block from me. When I drive further east down Plymouth into near North, I see a community with many affordable housing developments. This is not an issue of, I heard it, this is not an issue of not in our backyard. We're proud to be part of a community that supports affordable housing developments, but we feel we're doing more than our fair share here. So we know also that these developments are disproportionately responsible for the crime and the safety issues in the area. Everywhere, everything from the littering that we all have to pick up off our lawns.
I'm going to ask you to wrap it up.
Okay. Well, I think the point has been made. I came here last minute without talking points prepared, but We're concerned, we're scared, and we ask you to please hear us on this. Please reconsider your decision to vote in support of this, and please find other ways to support low-income, vulnerable members of our community, which we're happy to do, but in other ways. Thank you.
Thank you. If you could just go to the clerk and give them your info, that'd be great. Is there anyone else here to speak to this issue? Anyone? Yeah, you don't want to forget your phone, that'd be bad. Anyone else? Okay, seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. Councilmember Ellison?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, definitely want to appreciate all my neighbors who signed the petition and the folks who came in to give testimony today. I do feel a little challenged by the idea that the gun violence that's plaguing our city, that is certainly in North Minneapolis, we carry a significant burden of that. I am challenged by the idea, and I actually want to say offended by the idea that you would think that your neighbors, who maybe make less money than you or I, are responsible, purely responsible for that. When you look out your window and you see affordable housing within eyeshot of you, what you're seeing is safety. What you're seeing is people secure in their housing. That creates safe environments. What you're asking me to do here is deny somebody shelter because they make less money. And I'm not gonna do that. I do think that there are plenty of legitimate concerns from the neighbors. I've heard them. I plan to have follow-up conversations with the developer about how we can make sure that folks are at peace with the residents who are gonna be their new neighbors. I've also heard some idea that whenever you build an affordable housing complex, that it's people from outside the community who come in. As your council member, I cannot look at the housing needs of people in Ward 5 and think, there's enough affordable housing here. We don't need any more. I can't do that. That doesn't mesh with reality. So I didn't plan to give that little talk real quick, but I do want to say that that doesn't mean that those other issues that are not pertinent to this affordable housing aren't priorities for me. They absolutely are. Gun violence absolutely is. But it does mean that I am going to move to approve this TIF district and make sure that our neighbors have affordable places to live in our community. So thank you.
Further comments or questions? I want to add to what Councilmember Ellison has just said. From where I sit, more people means more population to bring in groceries. More people means more eyes on the street to bring in more safety. And ultimately, when we have such a challenge with affordable housing in the city, a project like this one on a major commercial corridor, not far from where I live, actually, kind of down the street, makes a lot of sense. I don't think that our staff would have moved forward with a project that felt that it would be creating a crime or lack of services problem. Bringing in people and housing them means they're more stable. And once they're more stable, they'll be more able to work, or they'll be better able to access education or childcare, and they'll have more income to be able to be a person who's able to buy things in the community. Ultimately, the City Council has taken on a priority of building affordable housing at all income levels and on commercial corridors. This is an example of that project. I stand by it and thank our staff for the work that you've done on this. For Councilmember Ellison.
I did want to just thank Arlene for the report, and I was going to quip at the beginning of this that they couldn't just let you coast out of here. They had to give you another tough one, but thank you for the work that you're doing, and I appreciate the amount of due diligence that you've put into this, and it's a part, when staff does that kind of due diligence and you give your recommendation, it's a part of how we can be confident in what we're voting on here as a council, so thank you.
So the motion in front of us is to approve the TIF district, to pass the pay-as-you-go note, and to authorize preliminary and final approval of the bond issuance, as well as a contingency pool financing fund for this project. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That item is approved. We'll now move on to this discussion agenda, which means the public hearing portion of our meeting is concluded. We will start with item number 18, which is, I think, ready to go. but I will defer to staff to give their feedback about that. So this is Nolo Kitchen and Bar, basement bar. Is there any staff here on this issue? Otherwise, we'll rely on Councilmember Rainville. Councilmember Rainville is getting in line. It's all good. Councilmember Rainville.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to move approval of this. I'm very grateful to Nolo for having met with the neighborhood group and also met with our police department for their safety plan. So I asked them to do that last cycle, and they have, and I'm very grateful, and I move approval of item number 18.
Item 18 has been moved for approval. Thanks, staff and Councilmember Rainville for working this out so eloquently. All in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? That item is approved. We'll now move on to a presentation that is a long time coming by Ms. Perrell on the former Kmart that we're now going to be calling the new Nicollet project. So for an update on the new Nicollet project, I will call on Rebecca Perrell, and I think because it looks like we received quite a long PowerPoint, we'd ask to hold questions until the end, if that's okay with the committee. Yes, that's okay. All right, Jason? Yep. Okay, great.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members.
Good afternoon.
Rebecca Perrell with CPED Business Development, project supervisor and colleague from Public Works, here to introduce herself as well.
Thank you, Chair Goodman and members of the committee. My name is Kelsey Fote. I'm a senior transportation planner with the Transportation Planning and Programming Division of Public Works.
Welcome, Kelsey. It's nice to see this collaboration. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us. Can I have the screen here, Eric, or do I have to look up there? Oh. Oh, I have to actually open it. Technology. Okay, great. Oh, no, Eric, that didn't work. There we go. Look at this. Okay, so here we are. And I thought I would just first remind everyone, not that most folks in the room or watching at home need reminding, but this is the former Kmart site, and we're calling it the former Kmart New Nicollet project area. Everything outlined in pink here is owned by the city of Minneapolis. And then you'll see it's the Greenway on the north, Lake Street to the south, First Avenue on the east, and Blaisdell Avenue on the west. And what at one point was a Nicollet Avenue stretching through the site and currently is blocked by a Kmart building and a large parking lot. But Public Works will be engaged in moving forward with new plans for New Nicollet in the future. Today what we're going to do is we're going to quickly walk through a little bit of the site history, the city's involvement in the site over the decades. I'll talk a little bit about the preparation that staff did in order to prepare for engagement, and then Kelsey will take over and talk about both the first phase of engagement that was completed as well as the next step, working in our way into phase 2 of engagement. One of the first things we did was, as staff, was work towards having a story map on the webpage on the city's website, and it's a history that's both full of pictures and images and interactive maps, as well as little snippets of history that talk about the site. It, of course, does start with acknowledging that the Dakota and Anishinaabe people have lived along the Mississippi River and the area that we know as Minneapolis today for over 12,000 years, and that's an important history that we remember as we begin and continue our work. It also talks about how the railway came through what at that point in time in the late 1880s or early 1880s was the edge of Minneapolis and was at grade. And then in 1912, as congestion at grade with horses and carriages, and not too long from then, cars really became too much congestion, and the city council directed the Milwaukee Railroad to trench the railway, which is now, as we know, the Midtown Greenway, and a little bit of history on that. Lake Street and Nicollet Avenue was an intersection of two main streetcar lines, and from the 20s through the late 60s, it was really very much an active and bustling commercial corridor, serving many square miles of folks living in South Minneapolis. Streetcar service was discontinued in '54, and about 25,000 people were displaced when the construction of 35W occurred in the mid-60s. And from that point on, after World War II, and a lot of different policies, both from local, state, and national policies, had a lot of folks leaving our inner cities and moving to the suburbs. And so our population declined, and a lot of the businesses at the same time had fewer customers and harder time staying afloat, so a lot did shutter their doors. And by the time we got to the 70s, there were still some operating businesses there, but the city at the time decided that it would really be a location where clearing the entire site and clearing the entire part of this intersection north of Lake Street would be an opportunity for new urban redevelopment. And the image on the right shows what planners at the time published as a new plan for urban redevelopment at this intersection. So you'll see the Lake Street and Nicollet and lots of small new locations for shops, etc., and some park spaces and trees and some parking as well. And so there was an idea in place, but what ended up happening after the city purchased the property and demolished the businesses that were still standing, the only developer that seemed to present itself at the time was Kmart, and they required a large surface parking lot in the front and a building at the back and closing the street. And so that is how we landed with what we have today. And Kmart opened in 1978. Short 20 years later, in 1998, the City Council formed what was called the Nicollet Lake Task Force, with really an aim to reopen Nicollet. So it didn't take a very long time before elected officials realized that the area is better served with connectivity and Nicollet connecting back to the Nicollet Avenue to the north of the Greenway. In 2015, I was happy to be a part of purchasing the grocery store for $5.275 million, and we purchased the leased fee estate of the Kmart property in 2017 for $8 million, and then later in 2020, we terminated the Kmart lease, which had a lease extending until 2053, and we were able to terminate that in 2020 for $9.1 million. So that's a little bit of history. Prior to starting with the phase 1 engagement, we decided we really needed to do some strong preparation for that. And that's why you see Kelsey and I here together, both from Public Works and CPED. It's really been a very collaborative effort. So we have a core team of folks that are working on this project, both from the preparation phase and throughout the engagement that we're working through. That's Public Works and CPED, our communications departments, neighborhood and community relations, and our city attorney's office. And I'm sure there's some others out there as well. But those are the primary folks that have been working with us. In November of 21, we did come to council and also do a presentation, and council adopted 2 different documents for us, one being a project expectations document that I'll talk about briefly, as well as a public engagement framework to get us started on the project. In the project expectations, we had 5 draft goals that the city staff and the core team decided as we were looking at city adopted policies and city ordinances, that these were the 5 main topics that we believed would be the good goals for the area as a way to get us started. So reconnecting people and places, building safe, equitable, and sustainable transportation networks, building for who is there today, live, work, shop, and play here, so offering lots of different opportunities, and safe and healthy communities. In the project expectations document, we found I believe it's 15 different adopted city policies and plans. So these are things like our Complete Streets policy, small area plans, the comprehensive plan, Vision Zero initiative, climate action plan, our SREAP, strategic and racial equity action plan, as well as our unified housing policy and transportation action plan. And all of these things we categorized into 11 different topics, as you see on the screen. We talked about what we already know from those policies and how they will apply to this site, as well as examples of things that we're still going to need to decide, and that those points where we still need to make future decisions are really where we want to focus our community engagement moving forward. And the public engagement framework was a way for us to be able to initiate an RFP for selecting consultants to work on phase 1 engagement. And so the engagement framework really set a foundation for how staff and the consultants could work together, and outlining how we will be asking the public and key stakeholders to play a role in the engagement. And so that is the time when I pass it off to Kelsey, and she's going to take over with phase 1 engagement.
Great. So our first phase of engagement, as Rebecca mentioned, was the launch and listen phase of engagement. It was meant to start dialogues with community members. So that was where we started. We brought on a group of organizations from the community to help and partner with that engagement. That was led by NAO partners and included the Central Area Neighborhood Development Organization, Lyndale, the Whittier Alliance, Phillips West, Freo, which is a local Somali youth-based organization, and the Lake Street Council. The first phase of engagement lasted from August 2022 until January 2023. Included that story map that Rebecca mentioned and a web page for the project. We went on 3 cultural radio shows to broadcast and promote the project itself, and hosted or participated in 21 different engagement events, including an open house, 4 focus groups, several stakeholder group meetings with larger groups of similar folks in the community, community meetings at each of those community organizations, and did 2 different door-knocking campaigns to get the word out on the street. One of these was focused on residential properties, and one was focused on businesses. We also were present at many events tabling throughout the community. We sent over 2,500 mailers to businesses and residents in the focus area, which is outlined in blue on the map there. We made over 200 connections with businesses, and we had an online survey and then also a Gov delivery and a project email to send out information. What we heard at our various events, we collected over 1,700 comments at our in-person events and through our project email. We categorized these into 9 main themes. You can see that the themes on the right, the ones that we received the most comments on were about transportation, about public space, about housing and commercial activity. We also received a number of comments that were outside of our project scope and wanted to highlight some of those pieces. They mostly focused on police and public safety strategies and thinking about ways that the city as a whole can look at programming and social services for people who are experiencing homelessness and new immigrants. As part of our online survey, we put it out in 5 different languages, English, Somali, Spanish, Vietnamese, and Hmong. It was available online, but also in paper copies. We received over 10,000 responses to that survey. About a quarter of those were from folks that lived in the neighborhood, so we want to highlight those, and the rest were from outside. We asked folks to reflect on their top 3 goals for the project based on those draft goals the project staff had developed in November 2021. The top priorities from people for the goals for the project were reconnecting Nicollet Avenue, making sure that we're including safe and healthy public spaces, that we're focusing on pedestrian safety, access, and comfort, and also including anti-displacement strategies. There's a lot of interest in the other strategies and goals as well, so want to call that out in addition. We asked people what kind of experiences would help them enjoy the site and use the site and come to the area more. The top thing that people were looking for was more greening. They wanted trees, landscaping, a little softer environment than the concrete that's out there today. Also a large interest, especially from people who lived in the neighborhood, for finding places for their day-to-day needs, things like groceries, low-cost goods and services. They are also interested in walkability and having social activities where community could gather. We grouped the comments from both the survey and the events into 6 different themes, which we're calling our themes of our desired outcomes. They are similar to those categories that we showed earlier about transportation and community space. They are connecting people to places, culturally relevant community spaces, housing affordability and wealth building, business opportunities and success, space for community services, and designing for inclusivity, safety, and sustainability. And then into those 6 themes, there are 23 total desired outcomes that describe what the community is looking for, what we heard through engagement, and what kinds of things the site and the street could have to serve them best. There's just a couple examples on this slide of some of those desired outcomes. Things like prioritizing people walking, rolling, and biking, and supporting transit service that's both planned and existing, creating spaces for people to gather and socialize outside of home or work, making sure that there's a mix of housing choices that bring people together from various walks of life, including affordable grocery stores and culturally relevant establishments to support the communities that live there today. And more trees and greening came up again and again. That's our phase one. We're moving into our phase two of engagement, which is categorized or is highlighted by the new Nicollet layout plan and public space framework. Phase two will be informed by our phase one work that we did, and that includes working with the stakeholders that we heard from and inviting new stakeholders to share their input during phase two. We'll be looking at expanding on some of the topics that we heard about in phase one so that we can dig more into the details there. And then really the focus of this one, as highlighted by the name, is focusing on the street layout and the public space opportunities that we could have on the site. In the former Kmart New Nicollet public engagement framework that Rebecca referenced, there's 3 steps described for this phase two. It follows similar to the phase one, where we'll have a preparation stage, an engage step where we enter into the community and look for feedback and share ideas, and then a recommendation phase where we come back to this council to bring those 2 products, a public space framework and the Nicollet Avenue layout plan. The public space framework is meant to identify opportunities for that public space, potential greening on the site, potential public art. The Nicollet Avenue layout plan will be like our typical layout plans, where we show the use of the street, the different modes, and the different ways that the space is divided for that new street. So the map on the right shows the green is largely the public space framework, where that will be focused, and the orange is the Nicollet Avenue layout plan, including the bridge over the greenway and the ramp connection that's there today. There'll be some overlap as we work through those pieces over the next many months, but those are generally where we have the 2 efforts focused. And that's what we have for you today, so we'll stand for questions, and thank you for your time.
That is great. I think one of the things that hit me the most was that there's a lot of alignment between what the city's overall priorities would be: affordable housing, transportation connections, more green space, more open space, and residents and non-residents who responded to the survey also. So it seems like our wants and dreams are all very similar, and that might make it slightly easier. I realize that, once you get into the specifics, that might be a different story. But I thought it was really good to see that the goals for the project and the experiences to improve on have a lot of commonality amongst them. We'll see if anyone else has comments or questions. That was the point of this, so anyone? No? Okay, thank you so much for bringing the report forward, and then we'll look forward to hearing what happens next. I believe that this is just going to be a receive and file.
It is, yes. Thank you.
And so I will thank you very much and move to receive and file item number 19. All in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? That is received and filed. Now we'll move on to our last item of the day, which is to try to complete the staff presentation questions on rent stabilization. I know we have a number of staff people here for this item. Thank you all for being here on the Lake Street item. We'll note that it's 2:54, and I will just commend Councilmember Chugtai for putting all of her questions in writing in advance and deferring her time at the last meeting. And I am going to go ahead and ask staff to give a brief explanation of some of those questions. And then I had asked Mr. Carl in advance of the meeting if he couldn't walk through next steps, because there are people in the audience wondering what's going on, and I think it would be fair to have them hear what the next steps would be. And then are there other members of the committee that have questions they'd like to ask at this time? Maybe it won't take an hour. Do you have some, sir? Okay. Why don't you go ahead, Joey?
Thank you, Chair Goodman and council members. As the chair stated, staff presented our analysis of 2 potential rent stabilization frameworks at the April 18th Biz Committee meeting. We received a number of questions in writing, and there were a couple that we identified as well from that meeting that we wanted to provide a more complete response to in writing. So that is before you, but staff are going to present those responses here. I'll begin and then pass it over to colleague Matthew Hendricks. So the first question states, just read it verbatim. During the Q&A period at Biz on April 18th, staff were asked about which organizations we contacted to complete the fiscal analysis required by the resolution. The staff said that they conducted extensive outreach, including specific outreach to potential vendors, but we didn't have a specific list available at that time. who specifically was contacted by staff or the mayor's office to complete this analysis. So the response here is that upon review of the economic analysis components requested by the council in the resolution, staff determined that an external consultant would be needed to fully respond to those deliverables. Staff developed a scope of services and a request for proposals and RFP, coordinated with the city procurement staff to initiate the solicitation process. The RFP was first released and circulated to participants in the city's target market program, which aims to expand opportunities for historically underutilized small businesses. The city did not receive any proposals through this solicitation. Then the RFP was released publicly, allowing any entity to submit a proposal. Staff sent notice of the opportunity to several entities, including the University of Minnesota. The contracting office for the university agreed to distribute the opportunity to several relevant departments within the university system. The RFP was also sent to Wilder Research, the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, and Dataless Advisory Services. Dataless responded with questions about the opportunity, which staff answered. However, as I'll go into more detail here momentarily, they ultimately declined to submit a proposal and provided a letter explaining their reasoning. The city did not receive any proposals through this public RFP process. After the deadline passed, staff reached out to a few other entities that might have relevant experience or expertise to offer to the project. Staff contacted and sent the scope of services to these economic and real estate consulting firms: BAE, Tischler Bice, RCLCO, Applied Real Estate Analysis, Inc., or AREA, Ehlers, and Ernst & Young. Staff had substantive conversations with a number of these firms, but ultimately none of them agreed to partner with the city for this work. At that point, staff assembled the interdepartmental team that you heard from earlier this month, or in April, to conduct the analysis that was possible with the data and expertise that we had within the city enterprise. The second question is related. There was an expectation expressed regarding a regression analysis or a statistical model that could get more at causation, and we were asked to provide a more thorough explanation of why that wasn't possible. So the resolution, as we've said, requested economic analysis of how a rent stabilization policy would impact the Minneapolis housing market broadly. Staff sought an external consultant, as we discussed, to assist, but because of both the lack of sufficient data to inform and the complexity of building an econometric model that could identify causal connections between a policy and specific market impacts. These would include development of new units, vacancy rates, rent amounts, preservation investments, and the conversion of rental to ownership units. Staff received substantive feedback from multiple firms confirming the assessment that the relevant data just does not exist in a way that would support an econometric model that would yield sufficient conclusions with confidence. One of the several firms consulted on this potential project responded that, quote, "Given how many economic and financial models we build, we're skeptical that good comparable data can be found that would allow any model to be built that accurately reflects the changes in key variables, such as how new development would be impacted by any given change in rent levels." The quote continues, "Building a model that changes development potential as rent levels change is easy. Building one that is accurate and defensible is anything but, especially in a rising interest rate environment and alongside high general inflation levels." So the letter that quote is from is attached to the document posted in LIMS. And at this point, I'll pass it over to Matthew.
Good afternoon, Chair Goodman, council members. I'm Matthew Hendricks. I'm a manager in the city's Development Finance Division. And I apologize, I'm getting over a cold. I'm at the stage where I feel pretty darn good, but don't quite sound like it yet. So happy to be speaking here. So I'm going to go through the next several questions. So the next question is as follows, then quoting verbatim. During briefings prior to the BIZ presentation, staff mentioned that the 2021 Cura study didn't specifically engage development interests in the Minneapolis market, which made Cura's conclusions about impact on new construction hypothetical. From reading the Cura report, there's a section devoted to their engagement with 30 development interests in the Minneapolis market. It sounded like city staff also engaged with specific developers and real estate interests. Who specifically did staff engage with? What questions were asked? What answers did they receive? And where was that documented? So the staff response to the question is as follows. Staff does not recall mentioning that the Cura study did not engage development interests. It's correct that Cura did qualitative analysis with multiple local market experts. The current staff report builds upon the Cura report by conversing with a smaller group of local market experts due to time constraints at a different point in time. The more recent conversations were less hypothetical in the sense that they were based on actual experiences in the marketplace since the adoption of the St. Paul rent stabilization policy. Also, the more recent conversations were focused on two specific policy frameworks as opposed to making predictions about development in the local market if a hypothetical rent stabilization policy with unknown policy specifics were enacted, which was the situation during the original Cura interviews. Cura specifically notes that the responses they received were speculative. Like Cura, we sought input from a range of sources described in Appendix B of the staff report and summarized in the same format as the Cura report in the chart below. And I'll show the chart here. Similar to Cura, we coded the different interviewees based on their participation in the market, and so some interviewees are coded in more than one category. So we interviewed 17 people, and they break down as follows. So 7 were owners or landlords, 9 were developers of market rate and affordable housing, 1 was a nonprofit developer, 3 were lenders, 4 were industry experts, and 11 were investors. This was not an attempt at academic research, but rather a more narrow, more narrow effort to understand the likely financial impacts of Framework 5 and Framework 7 in Minneapolis. The discussions varied by the interviewee's experience and role in the market. Representative topics covered included, how would Framework 5 impact your decisions, focusing both on existing portfolio and new development activity? How would Framework 7 impact your decisions? Again, focusing on both existing portfolio and new development activity. What policy specifics are most important to you? What is specifically happening in your local development pipeline? Which of these projects would be impacted by rent stabilization and how? What is the combination of policy factors that would minimize the potential negative impacts of rent stabilization? How would your operations adjust to accommodate rent stabilization? What, if any, direct experience do you have with the St. Paul rent stabilization policy? The messages we heard from industry professionals were largely consistent with the concerns identified in the Cura summary of responses. The main differences related to now having the specificity of 2 frameworks to assess. Current interviewees expressed that the differences between Framework 5 and Framework 7 are meaningful. In general, Framework 5 was identified as unworkable, with many pointing to the immediate revisions made to the original St. Paul policy, which generally resembled Framework 5. The following elements of Framework 7 were identified as essential: exempting new construction, including vacancy decontrol, and indexing allowable rents to the Consumer Price Index. Inclusion of these elements may prevent capital investors from avoiding Minneapolis entirely. However, even Framework 7 is still sufficient to deter many investors who have the option of investing in markets with no rent restrictions at all. The interview responses were represented in our report in the form of projected ranges of impact. The impacts of Framework 5 on new construction of rental housing are expected to be quite pronounced based on developer feedback, and the impacts of Framework 7 are expected to be less than for Framework 5, but still significant. Our financial models don't represent that either framework would completely eliminate new development. Each framework would have an impact on new production that would exacerbate the shortage of rental housing, which would increase rent prices significantly in the long term. The next question, I'll quote verbatim. Of the 7 academic studies used to inform the staff analysis, only 1 is peer-reviewed. The second study cited is from the DC Policy Center. Their board can fairly be described as a landlord think tank with overwhelming representation of real estate, finance, and Chamber of Commerce interests, who historically have opposed rent stabilization policies around the country, including funding opposition to ballot question 3 in Minneapolis. The 7th study cited analyzes data from St. Paul, but it's flawed in that only 1/4 of data was available at the time it was published. The conclusions of the paper are based on 3 months of data. Provided all of this context, how and why were these studies chosen? That concludes the question, and the staff response is as follows. The Cura Study and Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis 4-part webinar series regarding policies on rent regulation and tenant stability served as base resources when city staff initiated the rent stabilization fiscal impact analysis. To supplement those materials, staff surveyed existing literature reviews and articles synthesizing prominent studies, and furthermore looked to original research where particularly relevant. The goal of this approach was to ensure a wide net was cast and that notable or highly relevant original research was elevated. 5 of the 7 sources noted in the report and presentation are literature reviews or articles that synthesize a variety of other prominent studies. Notably, there was significant overlap relative to the Cura study, with 20 of the studies referenced in the Cura report also referenced in 1 or more of the 5 resources reviewed by city staff. The remaining 2 resources noted in the report and presentation were selected due to relevancy. The Diamond et al. 2019 study was widely referenced throughout the resources reviewed by city staff, and the Ahern and Giacoletti study was selected because it looks at St. Paul. In the St. Paul study, we agree that there's not a long time frame of observation available because the St. Paul rent stabilization policy passed very recently. Nevertheless, because of its proximity to Minneapolis, data from St. Paul is instructive. I'll turn to the next question, quoting it verbatim. A lot of conclusions about the impact on new construction are based on the impact in St. Paul. The decline in development permits began 4 to 6 months prior to the 2021 election when rent stabilization was implemented, including 2 months prior to the rent stabilization ballot initiative. Development permits also began bouncing back prior to the policy being amended by the St. Paul City Council. What other market conditions were considered in assessing the impact on development in St. Paul? Why was rent stabilization assigned as the cause of decline in development permits? How did staff reach conclusions about the decline in permitted new construction? That's the end of the question, and now turning to the staff response. As reported in the St. Paul Pioneer Press on April 23, 2023, quote, HUD's multifamily housing building permit data shows developers pulled permits for 3,626 housing units in Minneapolis last year, which keeps pace with the city's 5-year average and is several hundred units above its 9-year average. The pace of construction picked up about 16% in Minneapolis, or 500 units, last year compared with the year before. In St. Paul, developers pulled permits for 2,043 units in that category in 2021, compared with 1,072 units last year, which is several hundred units below the city's 5-year average and about on par with the city's 9-year average. Year over year, that's nearly a 50% decrease in construction activity. End of quote. It's true that development decisions are guided by a wide range of variables. However, comparisons to St. Paul are useful because Minneapolis and St. Paul are adjacent and share the same regional labor market, transit systems, and development ecosystem. In assessing the decline in new rental apartment construction in St. Paul, rent stabilization was assigned as a primary cause of the decline because most other relevant variables in St. Paul and Minneapolis are the same or very similar. We learned that for St. Paul's largest redevelopment site, Highland Bridge, the rent stabilization policy caused their capital partners to disengage from the market rate rental projects, bringing them to a halt. If not for the rent stabilization policy, approximately 400 rental units would have begun construction in 2022 and 2023, with another 400 apartments, with another 400 apartments starting in the next 2 years. These buildings are now all on hold. Tax increment from these projects was designated to enhance the affordability in the subsidized apartments on the site, deepening the affordability from 50% AMI rents to 30% AMI rents. Because the market rate projects are not advancing, the improved affordability in the subsidized housing is no longer assured. The next question, I'll read verbatim. Staff cites the first study from the Brookings Institute written by Rebecca Diamond to support the conclusion that, quote, a rent stabilization policy will adversely affect the supply of new housing development by making it more difficult for developers to secure capital for their projects. This, end of quote. The study itself does not support this conclusion. The study's conclusion is about existing units being taken off the market. In San Francisco, other market forces impact condo conversions of existing units. State law places no limitations on these conversions. That's a policy choice Minneapolis could account for, like the limitations Minneapolis has placed on short-term rental conversions. In New York City, deregulation policies, like units becoming exempt from rent control or stabilization policies after reaching $2,500 per month, impact existing units being taken off the market. How or why did staff use this study to support their conclusion about adverse effects on the supply of new housing development? That's the end of the question, and then the staff response is as follows. The sentence immediately preceding the reference to the Rebecca Diamond study reads as follows, quote, rent stabilization policies have led to decreases in the overall rental housing stock and new construction in the municipalities that have implemented them, end of quote. The reduced overall quantity of existing rental housing stock due to attrition is based on the Rebecca Diamond study. The reduced quantity of new construction was referenced in reports 2 and 4 as listed in our summary of resources. Our estimates regarding new production are based on a combination of studies, local stakeholder input, observations of St. Paul projects, and decades of staff experience in real estate development and finance. Among local stakeholders who are committed to continuing development in Minneapolis, there was concern that a rent stabilization policy would reduce the number of projects they could finance and slow down their process for completing projects. Some of the developers we interviewed who previously developed in Minneapolis had no current projects in the city and have also pulled out or avoided other markets with rent stabilization because of the challenges involved. Again, quoting the St. Paul Pioneer Press reporting on April 23, 2023, quote, the slowdown is real, said St. Paul Councilmember Chris Tolbert, who chairs the city's Housing and Redevelopment Authority. Quote, I think St. Paul has got some work to do to regain our momentum. For the last question, I'll turn it back over to Joey.
Thanks, Matthew. And Chair and council members, I meant to mention earlier, I just wanted to clarify that the reason why we're being really methodical in reading through these responses is because this has been a collaborative interdepartmental effort with lots of staff working on different pieces of this. So we want to make sure that we give the most accurate response here in this public venue today. The final question that I'll address briefly here is at the April 18th BIZ meeting, we were asked about a comparison between the frameworks that the Minneapolis work group put together and as compared to the policy in St. Paul. So attached to the document in LIMS is a chart going through the differences, and there's a lot on this slide, but just wanted to really briefly walk through. So the first two columns show the key components of the two frameworks. We went through those quite a bit at the last meeting, but key differences are the cap. So Framework 5 recommended a fixed 3% cap, whereas Framework 7 recommended a variable rent increase cap that would be tied to CPI. His differences, Framework 5 recommends vacancy control. Framework 7 recommended vacancy decontrol. Framework 5 recommended not having rent banking, and 7 recommended that a policy should. The other big difference between those two, just as a reminder, is that Framework 5 recommended that no specific exemptions based on property type. but did recommend exceptions for capital improvements. Framework 7, on the other hand, did recommend exempting subsidized housing and new construction for 30 years, along with owner-occupied housing. There were also some differences in recommendations around compliance and supplemental policies. The columns on the right, the yellow, the third column there, shows key components of the policy as originally adopted in St. Paul on their November 2021 ballot. That policy, which was effective beginning May 1st, 2022 through the end of 2022, featured a fixed rent increase cap of 3%, an allowance for a deviation for a property owner to receive a reasonable return on their investment, and around compliance, there's notes about how self-certification mostly for increases from 3 to 8%, and staff oversight for a larger increase than that. The final column on the right is the currently effective policy in St. Paul. So this was amended by the council in September of 2022. Then those changes went into effect at the beginning of this year. So the currently effective policy in St. Paul, the rent increase cap stayed the same, 3%, but did allow for vacancy decontrol as described in the section below. The other new key feature is that the currently effective policy does exempt new construction from the policy on a rolling basis for 20 years and allows property owners to self-certify an increase to get that reasonable return on investment if an owner is going to increase the rent from above 3% but less than 8%. They can self-certify that increase. Staff oversight would kick in for increases north of 8%. And then I would just note that they allow a feature in the current policy is a just cause vacancy increase. And what that means is that if a property owner can show that that unit became vacant for a just cause, a legitimate reason as spelled out by the policy, in that situation, in between tenants, the owner could increase the rent by whatever CPI plus 8%. So by a larger margin with some checks that that vacancy was due to a just cause. So just wanted to provide that overview of the policy as it stands. And that's the end of our prepared questions, but we're happy to stand for any others.
Great, thank you. So I'll just check in with my colleagues and see if we're going to have Mr. Carl speak about process next, because I feel like it's important to lay out what's going to happen next. And I just wanted to see if anyone else had questions, just to manage time. Beth, did you have some questions? And do you also have questions? So should we take Mr. Carl next or do you want us to take your questions next? Mr. Carl, since you're down there, why don't you come up and give the public and everybody else a chance to hear kind of what the next steps will be.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the committee. I appreciate this opportunity and will be as brief as I can, but appreciate that this is the first conversation publicly we've had in terms of process. So appreciate the opportunity to put that out there for the community to understand as we go forward with this. This is, first and foremost, I'll say, a unique process. The city has never done this before. When we have referred matters to the voters in the past, they have been amendments to our city charter that follow a very specific path, and Minneapolis over the years has gotten very good at how we handle charter amendments. That is not what this process is. This is typically done by the council through its legislative authority. This is a legislative act. It would normally be done by an ordinance. However, the statute which governs this procedure, Minnesota Statutes Section 471.9996, requires that the actual policy be referred to voters for approval. So this is a bit different, and as I said, at least in terms of my research, and certainly can defer to those who've been here longer, has not been done before in the city of Minneapolis. So we are in some uncharted waters in that regard. As you know, in 2021, the question of whether or not the city of Minneapolis should have authority to enact a policy on rent stabilization was referred to the electorate, and that question, ballot question number 3, was approved by the voters. It was then codified as Charter Amendment number 185, and it became legally effective on December 3rd, 2021. What that ballot question did was give to the city the authority to consider a policy, but not to enact the policy. To consider it, but to enact a policy, you must refer the policy back to the voters, and the voters must approve it. The Council then put together a housing rent stabilization work group, which met during the better part of 2022 and into the early part of 2023, studying this issue and ultimately presenting two separate recommendations that the staff has spent the last committee meeting and this committee meeting digesting and analyzing for you. The process now, in terms of what happens next, is whether or not City Council can concur or reach agreement on the framework for a policy and to refer that policy to the electorate for their consideration. The way that would normally work is that a policy is done by an ordinance. It's a legislative enactment by the body. Once there are at least seven members of the body who reach concurrence on the framework for that policy, that can then be referred to the attorneys. The attorneys then will use that direction from the body in order to frame up an ordinance. That ordinance would flow through the normal process that we are familiar with, subject to a public hearing, subject to refinement, perfection, amendment, and ultimately a vote by this body. However, because it's a ballot question, that ordinance then is going to be accompanied by a separate act that's related, a resolution. State law says that when we refer questions to the voters, the actual language that shows up on the ballot, not the actual policy, the language that people would see, has to be set by a resolution of this body. So a separate but related action, a resolution setting forward the ballot language, has to also be adopted by this body. Both an ordinance and a resolution under our charter require a minimum of 7 affirmative votes, the fixed membership of the body, 7 affirmative votes for passage. Once those acts are approved by this body with 7 or more votes, they're subject to consideration by the mayor. The mayor has 5 days under the charter, not including Sundays, in which to consider an act. The mayor has 3 options, as he always has on any action of the city council. The mayor can approve what the council has submitted and authenticate that by signature and return it to us. In that instance, the process moves forward and the question is referred to the voters. The mayor can take no action within those 5 days and return those actions to the city clerk's office, in which case they're deemed approved and they go forward to the voters. Or, as we know, the mayor can veto the council's action. In that case, the act returns to the next regular council meeting, meeting the full body, and the council, if it can achieve a 2/3 majority of the entire membership, meaning at least 9 affirmative votes, can choose to override a mayoral veto. If a veto is put in place by the mayor, and if the council can achieve that 2/3 supermajority vote to overturn the mayor's veto, then the question could be referred to the voters. The ultimate timeline here, notwithstanding the council's legislative process and how much time that may consume, is also set by statute. And under Minnesota statutes 205.16, subdivisions 4 and 5, the city clerk must transmit to both the county auditor and to the Secretary of State any ballot questions to be referred to voters at a general election no less than 74 days prior to the date of the general election. Given our general election this year in November, the 74-day period means that the deadline by which all action must be completed this year is Friday, August 25th. So by close of day on Friday, August 25th, the council will have needed to take all actions in order to take action on an ordinance, to pass a resolution, to reconsider any mayoral veto if there is to be such. I will note that based on the council's current calendar, the last regular scheduled meeting of the full city council prior to that statutory deadline is Thursday, August 17th. Once the council has completed all of that work, and assuming that a ballot question is ready to refer to voters, this year it would go to the ballot in November, and then based on the outcome of those voting on the question, a majority voting in the affirmative, the question would be approved. There would need to be careful consideration, I would caution, by the body as it crafts an ordinance in terms of effective date. Absent an effective date in the ordinance, I think the presumption would be that the ordinance would become effective within 30 days. Clearly, the city of Minneapolis is not prepared within a month to do all of the work necessary to prepare, to staff, to resource, to budget for what the rent stabilization policy may anticipate. And so that consideration would also need to be considered as you consult with your attorneys in the drafting of an ordinance. Appreciate the opportunity to present that and happy to stand for any questions on process if there are any.
So, Mr. Carl, thank you for that, just because I think a lot of people are just thinking here and now. This is a Q&A with a time certain, and it's going to be a receive and file. But we can expect that those that are interested in moving this forward will bring a notice of introduction at the council meeting coming up. Isn't that correct?
Yes, the process normally there's a formal process and then an informal process to get us there. The informal process is that we need to find some consensus amongst the majority of the body. That consensus then informs the attorneys what to draft. The formal process, of course, is a notice of intent to introduce that is made at any regular meeting of the full body, and that notice to introduce then begins the council's legislative process. I think on behalf of staff, I would say for us to begin that process of bringing forward any sort of an outline and actual draft of a policy, we would need to make sure that there are at least 7 council members who are in alignment on what those provisions, maybe the elements of a policy might be.
Okay, so, but I also just want to kind of describe that today's action is a receive and file, and those of us that are not enthusiastic voting for a receive and file isn't a vote. It's a vote to take the information from staff, and it's up to those that are wanting to move forward to move through the council process. And there will be a public hearing, is that correct?
Yes, Madam Chair. As you said, today's action is to receive the feedback, recommendations, report, and comments from staff. Once that process begins officially after notice, and as we go through the regular steps of the legislative process, there is, of course, an opportunity for a formal public hearing, and people can engage through that process at that point.
I just wanted to make sure that when people come on any side of something and then they don't get to speak, there's a frustration, and that's because we're just not at that part of the process yet. But there will be a public hearing on this should it move forward.
I would also, Madam Chair, I should have mentioned this, state law requires, and for fairness on all sides of an issue, we don't just have a general public comment period at meetings. We would give notice of that. Mm-hmm. The notice would be given when the agenda is published. There's at least a 3-day provision in advance so that all sides can prepare, can get themselves and advocates ready to come forward and participate in that public hearing process. So we do notify that on our website. It's in the agendas, and so when the step comes for a public hearing, there'll be adequate notice to the community.
Okay, great. Other questions on process for Mr. Carl? Councilmember Ellison.
Thank you, Mr. Carl. Wanted to just, I think I know the answer to most of these questions, but just wanted to get your reaction. With the passage of question 3, the council gave itself authority. The people gave the council the authority to pursue this policy, but there's nothing in that within question 3 that said that this policy had to be pursued sort of within the consecutive year, right? This now is just an authority that the council has. We could theoretically pursue this policy in a year should there not be enough support, a threshold of 7 to pursue this policy. Is that correct?
Chair, Councilmember Ellison, you're correct. The authority given by the people was that you may consider a policy. There is no timeline, and if it's not this year, the next year, 5 years, 10 years, that authority remains in place until it's changed by either the council or vote of the people.
Great, thank you. And I had one more question on this portion of the policy, but it kind of escapes me right now. I did have not so much questions, but I did sort of have some reactions. I feel like mostly in the last couple of weeks, I've had some opportunity to, have the conversations that I need to have in terms of, the questions I had on the day where we got the presentation. And so I feel like a lot of those questions are resolved. But I did want to talk a little bit about the council's policymaking process, because it did occur to me as we were getting the presentation that there's always been a certain element, I feel like you've noted this, of informality to how we create policy, how we create ordinances in the city council. That's always existed, but there have been some norms. And I've noticed that those norms have been largely absent in this process. Usually, even as we've gotten policy recommendations from external boards, authors of those legislations would work with relevant staff to figure out what would be presented to the public. Then we'd have a public hearing and those kinds of things. In that time, that sort of informal time, there's time to mitigate unintended consequences of a potential policy. I know that myself and Attorney Nielsen were able to work, and staff were able to work on limited look back and a number of other things, and we kept running into problems that we had to mitigate because we thought that there was a solution there as well, but there were also some problems that we had to mitigate along the way. Those problems, draft 1 of that, right, that was at its rawest, wasn't presented to the council. and presented, this policy was. It kind of felt like we've had two versions of the policy from my vantage point as a council member, at their draft one. And so I just sort of noticed that's kind of how things played out. And it does feel like it has put, folks on either side of this issue sort of in a weird place when it comes to advocating for this issue, because there are now presumed conclusions about the policy without that sort of informal due diligence. There's not really a question in there, but that was sort of an observation that I had. And I don't know if that reflects sort of your observation of some of the norms that we've taken to create policy, but it does feel like, despite nothing being written down, that some norms weren't followed in this process so far.
Madam Chair, if I might, to Councilmember Ellison, I may differ with you in some regard. This body, with the mayor, appointed a group of individuals representing a diverse perspective of stakeholders across the community to give their input to you. Sure. They came up with 2 recommendations. Mm-hmm. We have yet, as a city enterprise, to even put pen to paper to come up with the outline of a draft. Right. So when you say this, we have a draft before us. We do not. Sure. We have a report from a group you all put together to give you advice. They gave you 2 different recommendations. At this point in the process, I agree with you, there is the formal and informal. And one of the things you've heard me say many, many times, all of you have heard, is that when we move away from our rules and our structures, we tend to have the train come off the tracks, and then it takes a lot of effort to put the train back on the tracks. The point now is for the body, at least the majority of the body, to tell staff, we like these elements and these provisions, and then that starts that drafting process. That does not, however, once that consensus of the body gives staff direction, prevent staff and council members from doing that sort of hands-on, what next and what provisions do we need to tweak? So I think that what I would offer in response is we haven't even begun the council's official process. All we have done is receive and file a report from an advisory group and heard staff's analysis and their position on that. That certainly does not constitute anything official by this body.
Thank you. I think that's a great way to sort of summarize it. And I think it's probably reflected some of my individual sort of confusion about how this has been going. I know that the council's sort of taken the action to get us here, so I'm not blaming anyone or thinking that there was an ulterior motive here. But as we were getting the presentation, both our private presentations and the public one, it just occurred to me, something seemed a little out of step here. And to that end, I think that it's important that the public realize that the analysis that we've gotten is an analysis of 2 specific frameworks. And I think that staff has worked in good faith to create that analysis. I don't have a criticism of that particular analysis. I do think that there are a lot of people in the community, both with expertise but also advocates without expertise but lived experience, who are advocating for this policy. And as a policymaker, as somebody who represents a ward who would greatly benefit from rents not increasing exponentially, I think that really matters. I think also, just for the sake of the public, again, not necessarily a question, I think it's really important to say, for me to sort of voice an observation, which is that, we heard in the presentation a lot of how a potential rent control policy could generate gentrification, but we're also seeing folks who have expertise in gentrification still advocating on some level for a version of this policy. And so that is something that I think that, for folks who are wondering, all right, we got this presentation, we got this information, obviously it's all bad. Why is the council still having this discussion? Well, that's why. The framework, the analysis was completed, but narrow in its scope. And also, we have people in our communities with expertise who I think really believe in a version of this policy. And so I don't have too many questions. I really do appreciate staff. I really appreciate the work group. I will say that there was a part of me that wanted to apologize to the work group. I think that, they presented 2 policies. I think, while the due diligence on those 2 policies were important and valuable, the general places where they landed on the spectrum of what kind of rent control people would want is kind of what we assumed at the beginning of the year. And so I think that, I hope folks don't feel like their advice was sort of not heeded or, that their time was wasted, because I think a lot of people put a lot of effort into being there. For now, I think that's my analysis. Those are my comments.
You've hit your 7 minutes.
I've hit my 7 minutes, so there you go. I wasn't even looking at the timer, so right on time. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
And you're welcome to come back for your next 5 minutes if you want to do that too. Okay, Councilmember Rainville.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And first of all, I have to thank the staff for all this and all the different departments. And I see Director Brennan out there, so thank you for your leadership and all this. It's appreciated. I do have just a couple more questions. We all share the goal of safe, affordable housing. In the past, councils have put some policies in place. Could you maybe somebody talk about the current strategies that we have for affordable housing, especially inclusionary zoning, which I'm really curious about. And I do have one more question after that.
Good afternoon. Alfred Port, Housing Director for the City of Minneapolis through the Department of Community Planning and Economic Development. Through the Chair, Councilmember Rainville, we're in the process of completing our Way Home report, our annual housing strategies report, and hopefully by the next BIS committee, we'll be bringing forth a presentation. But in that report, it highlights 7 key strategies, and I'll just go over them for the purposes of this and then give you a sneak preview on what you will see when we present. Increase housing supply, diversity, and affordability in all neighborhoods. Produce more affordable rental housing and preserve subsidized affordable rental housing for 30 years or more. Preserve unsubsidized naturally occurring affordable housing. Improve and sustain access to home ownership, especially among low-income Black and Indigenous people of color residents. Support renters, prevent and end homelessness, and maximize potential of publicly owned land to meet city housing goals. As it relates to the report itself, some of the things that you would see, and I'm going to highlight a few things that are key to the discussions that we're having right now. In 2022, for instance, the city closed on the financing of 919 new affordable rental units. This is an historic high for the city. The previous 3 years, we averaged 634 units per year between 2019 and 2021, also a historic high. That's compared to 322 units of affordable housing between 2011 and 2018. Of the 919 units closed in 2022, 264 of those units were affordable to households at 30% AMI. That's about $35,000 for a family of 4. And in context, a mother and 3 kids, that mother making $16 an hour, working full-time. That's nearly 6.5 times the number of 30% units completed in the previous 2011 through 2018. We've also made some headways on the homeownership front. And through our programs between 2018 and 2022, we've assisted 5,000 households move into homeownership. 70% of those families were BIPOC, and the average income for those families were 50% of the area median income. We also preserved 2,500 units of naturally occurring affordable housing. Those things are critical to some of the discussions that we're having here. Specifically as it relates to your question around inclusionary zoning, since we adopted the inclusionary zoning policy, there are 23 projects that have permitted, totaling 3,898 total dwelling units. 189 of those units were affordable at 60% or below, and 187 of them were affordable student bedrooms. We also had developers pay an in lieu fee of $6.8 million, and all of those resources would go to support the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. I want to also add that were we to move forward with the adoption of an inclusionary zoning policy, there will be a need for us to go back and just analyze the feasibility or the viability of that tool against whatever is adopted by this body. So those are the responses that I have.
So could you just elaborate a little bit? If a rent control policy was enacted, you'd have to analyze how that would affect inclusionary zoning?
Yeah, so at the time when the policy was enacted, we had, we viewed it from a lens where we had lower interest rates, the market, the construction costs were not as high as it is today, the labor costs weren't as high as it is today, so there will be a need for us to do that. We are planning on doing that anyway with regards to, since the program has been in or the policy has been in place, so we will be coming back in 2024 to give you an update.
Thank you. And I have one last question. So could someone on staff explain, I know the last council passed very many strong renter protection policies. And if someone could outline those renter protection policies and.
I'll have Kira from Rec Services come in and respond.
Thank you.
Hi, Kira Hesbargen, Deputy Director in Operations and Engagement and Regulatory Services. Chair Goodman, Councilmember Rainville, thank you very much for that question. Regulatory Services, in looking at the Renter First housing policy, has enacted a host of different programs. So I'll go through those sort of policies to talk to you about what those are. The first is the advance notice of sale. So that focuses on building owners who have properties and naturally occurring affordable housing properties to provide notice of sale in advance, so that way their renters know. They must notify the residents and give them that ability, that ability to know about the building sale. The second is looking at inclusive screening criteria and security deposits. So that basically sets limits on what they can use when they look at that background check, and then also what you can cap or what you can require for a security deposit. There's also renter relocation assistance. So in the case of a rental license being revoked, denied, or canceled, the property owner has a responsibility to provide relocation assistance equal to 3 months of rent, and that applies in situations where the renter is forced to vacate due to conditions that were within the property owner or property manager's control. There's also eviction protections, and so that means then that the property owner must provide 14 days written notice about the eviction, so they have that time. Time event energy disclosure, what that looks at is it requires property owners to disclose energy use at the time of rent. So as those living in the property are really thinking about their budgets, what they might think that could be, so that can factor into their decision. And then the right to counsel is one of the last ones, which ensures that low-income renters have the ability, if their income is less than 200% of the federal the poverty line, to have counsel.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here today. So we have 2 more people in line and 11 minutes. So I'm going to call on Councilmember Chugtai, who is next, and then just be conscious that I think Councilmember Chavez also has a question.
Sounds good. Thank you, Madam Chair. I wanted to just start with a quick follow-up to the staff response to question number 3. Really, really appreciate the thoughtfulness that staff put into this. I think, Matthew, you presented on this one. I like looking through the representative topics that were covered in interviewing those about their experiences and the role of the market, owners, landlords, developers, the list that's shared here. I see a really thoughtful list of questions, and I'm very, very impressed by how open-ended these questions were to allow those who are being interviewed to actually share their experience. I often find that when we conduct community engagement as an enterprise, we offer binaries to people, and we don't ask open-ended questions that allow for such a thoughtful response from folks. So I'm wondering, if the city has any plans to do a similar type of engagement with tenants in our city who would also be very deeply impacted by such a policy, to ask them similar questions about their opinions on Framework 5 and Framework 7 and components of the policy that are critical for them.
Thank you, Councilmember Chugtai, for that question. That was not our charge for this exercise. So what staff was asked to do is basically a fiscal analysis of the very specific frameworks that came out of the rent stabilization work group. So as Councilmember Ellison pointed out earlier, our scope of work was very limited. So it did not include the resolution that the City Council adopted. Creating the rent stabilization work group did include tenant interests in that work group, as you well know, but there was no further charge to do any direct engagement with renters as part of the work that was identified in the resolution. So if the council wants to move forward with a specific rent stabilization policy, that would be in addition to the required public hearing that would be required as part of the ordinance process that City Clerk Carl laid out earlier, that would be up to the discretion of the council what kind of a process you wanted to pursue in developing that policy and what kind of engagement you wanted to do.
Sounds good. Thank you. I wanted to just a couple of conclusions that I wanted to share here based on the two presentations that we've now had from staff in a couple of weeks to really digest this report. I think that it's just really important for us as policymakers, but then also for the public, when we are receiving this presentation from staff, reading the report from staff. It is easy to reach the conclusion that everything in the report is fact. And I think I remember when Ms. Dobson presented last time, she might have talked about this, but these are just your best guesses based on the information that you that you found to be relevant at this time, right? And I was reminded of this as I was reading the letter from the company we asked to complete the economic analysis RFP, and they even tell us, building a model that changes development potential as rent levels change is easy, but building one that is accurate and defensible is anything but. And so, just reminding ourselves and each other that these are just our best guesses, your best guesses at this time. These are not fact. This is not defensible by subject matter experts. And I think that's all I've got for now.
Ms. Brennan.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair and Councilmember Chugtai. With all due respect, I would not characterize the report that staff did as a guess. And I mean, we absolutely believe with our collective expertise, which is extensive and spans decades of financing, developing housing, affordable housing, of creating, implementing the policy framework that supports the production, the historic record of production of not just affordable housing, but market rate housing in our city. This is staff that has been working on developing and implementing these policies that has been extremely effective in advancing the city's goals around producing more housing of all kinds, as well as producing record levels of affordable housing. Staff absolutely maintain in this report that are we meeting the needs? Absolutely not by a long shot. And so we also understand the tension here about needing, what are those additional investments? What are those additional policies that we can do to address the issue that has been identified, which is that too many individuals, too many families in our city are paying more than they can afford for rent or aren't able to even access housing. And that is a problem that we discuss in our report, and we identify what we consider to be much more targeted and effective solutions to addressing those needs in lieu of a rent stabilization policy. So I wanted to, can we factually say that we have, uncontested proof that what we strongly believe will happen based on our experience to the housing market with the rent stabilization policy? No, but conversely, there is no there's no proof that what we're saying is likely to happen will not happen either. So I think it's an important distinction, and I guess I don't think our staff team would necessarily agree that with the characterization of the report being a guess.
Councilmember Chavez, you have the last word, and there's about 4 minutes left.
Chair Goodman, I did have a statement. I just want to make some clarifications. There were not 2 recommendations. The group came out with 1 recommendation that received the majority of the vote. The goalposts just happened to move as it became clear that the work group was going to recommend a strong rent stabilization policy that would serve the communities that are burdened by rent increases in the city of Minneapolis. I do appreciate staff pointing out that some of these renter protections ordinances that have been passed over the past few years, but I think it's important to note that some of the critics of rent stabilization were the same critics of those policies that they said that they would halt construction and investments in building affordable housing and housing in the city of Minneapolis. Based on some of the answers we received, I did want to bring awareness that according to CURA, the empirical research indicates that rent regulations have been effective at achieving 2 of its primary goals: maintaining below market rent levels and moderating price appreciation. I represent the most racially diverse ward in the entire city of Minneapolis. My constituents voted with 70% yes on question 3 to enact this policy, to authorize the city council to enact a policy. And this doesn't even include the residents that can't vote in my district, which is a big majority of it, undocumented folks that believe that rent control will support them and not allow them to go homeless. If you knock on doors, if you hear from community members and do community engagement, you will hear about the families that are being impacted by the rising cost of rent. People that have to choose between food for their family or a roof over their head. College students that have to pay for their expensive tuition along with housing, the working mother that is single that has to balance 3 jobs and still cannot afford rent, and the families that have to make sacrifice to barely get by. This is one of the most important things happening in the entire city of Minneapolis. And the blanket no policy does not serve, nor does it improve the lives of some of the most vulnerable communities in the city of Minneapolis. I don't like that the answer to this is that the GBI will increase or support our community members in this moment, because we know that it would only be for a pilot that will be for a limited amount of people in this city, while the others are going to be left to starve and be left homeless or be able to have to make sacrifices. And I'll just say this isn't about Framework 5 or Framework 7. It's that residents across Minneapolis gave us the trust and power to move on a policy. I looked at the data and saw the areas in Minneapolis with more communities of colors and immigrants that voted in favor of establishing this policy. Let's look at North Side. Ward 4 voted in favor. Ward 5, 59% voted in favor. Ward 6, 79% voted in favor. Ward 8, 61 voted in favor. Ward 9, my ward, 70% voted in favor. And let's look at the majority renter community in Ward 10, 66% voted in favor. I believe in a city that cares about renters as much as it cares about corporate developers. Maybe then we would be able to reduce homelessness and improve the lives of Minneapolis residents. And with that, I have some quick questions, just 2 of them. For staff, if you can walk me through how many families are currently served by both the GBI program and the Stable Homes and Stable Schools program.
There might not be staff here to be able to answer that specific question, but they're happy to send it to you in writing.
Thank you. I guess my point is, I want to figure out how much it's going to cost to scale up GBI and the Stable Homes and Stable Schools program to make sure that every community member that is struggling by the rent hikes in this city are going to be protected and served. Because if that's a recommendation we're going to establish in the city, let's do it now, and let's protect these families. But until then, we need to enact strong rent control now.
Thank you to the staff and to the members of the council. Again, I especially want to thank council members Ellison and Chugtai, who submitted written questions and deferred questions to others at the last meeting. I want to thank all of the staff, professional staff who worked on the project and put so much time into it. Seeing no further business before us and without objection, I'm going to declare the meeting adjourned.
Oh, such a good girl. Hey, Mama. This mom I'm in love with. She's the best mom ever. She has 6 babies. These guys are fat and healthy. His right eye. I know, you're the loud one. I was worried.